Hello, friends, book lovers, readers. My name's Grace Klaus, and I'm wearing a different hat for Literature Circle today. I am going to be doing the reviewing of our December book, which is Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. This book was written in 2017 and spent quite a long stay on the bestseller list. It concerns life in Memphis, Tennessee during the 30s and 40s with infants and all orphans, no matter how they happened to become orphans, how they arrived at those circumstances. It also concludes then in present day. I read this book for the first time in May of this year. I remember finishing it on a Sunday afternoon, and within 30 minutes, I had called Becca Price on the phone and said, Becca, if you do not have a reviewer yet for Before We Were Yours, I would love to do it. I was that taken with the book. I loved it. The first time, the second time, and I probably will read it again someday again. Not only because of the story, but I was constantly overcome with wondering how could someone like Georgia Tann, who operated the Tennessee Children's Home Society in Memphis, how could someone like that get away for 26 years doing the things that she was doing? And even more than that, what kind of a person ends up doing those kind of things to children? I'm thinking that Lisa Wingate may have had some of the same questions. In reading about her, she had started out as a journalist, and she also wrote for magazine articles. And I'm thinking that her investigative tendencies, probably she got a whiff of this situation during this time period and maybe saw the story that she could write, and I'm so glad she did. I have two goals today that I'd like to accomplish. First of all, for those of you that have not read the book yet, seems to be some traffic outside. I'll try to speak up and hope you can still hear me. My first goal is for those of you that have not read the book yet. I hope to make it give you enough to keep you interested and want to read it, and yet in suspense enough that I'm not going to tell you how it ends, so that you will want to know the ending. For those of you, my second goal, that have read the book already, I'm hopeful that I can give you some information maybe that you don't have, and that you might be interested in hearing as I was when I read the book. Georgia Tann, I researched first of all because she is at the center of this book. I read another book, The Baby Thief, and I'm showing you this and recommending it. It's by Barbara Raymond, and perhaps I'll even leave my copy in the library when we're done. It does a biography of Georgia Tann, but it also presents quite a few stories of true stories of families, children that were touched by Georgia during those years also, and the families. And I enjoyed reading that book also. Georgia Tann was born in 1891 in Hickory, Mississippi. Now, in case you haven't heard of Hickory, it's understandable. It's a population of 470. Her father, George, whom she was named after, had actually more influence over her than anyone else ever did in her lifetime. He was a federal court judge, and at that time in Mississippi, federal court judges were charged with finding shelter for homeless children, either by adoption or by placement into workhouses or state asylums. Orphanages were very scarce back at the turn of that century, and particularly if you lived in the rural area of Mississippi. So Georgia did grow up not unaccustomed to seeing orphans. Very often George would bring children that would have to stay maybe even overnight at their house before a placement could happen. I would like to, speaking of house, I would like to read a description of that house in Hickory, Mississippi, to give you an idea of how Georgia was raised, that she really did not want for anything. Georgia's Hickory homestead, which in its prime during the 1930s, had been the largest and most beautiful in town, with servants' quarters and a brick courtyard, a large wraparound porch, fountains, imported palm trees, and a room-sized walk-in cooler that provided the only refrigeration in town. George, her father, seemed to be respected as a judge. However, the town people had some other things to say about his personality. He was arrogant, argumentative, dominating, a womanizer, and emotionally cold. And I believe his daughter shared some of those characteristics with him. However, I found no evidence that George, as a federal judge, ever did any wrongdoing or broke any laws in his adoptions or placements. George was probably the only person in her life that she could not control, and vice versa. He wanted her to be a concert pianist. She despised the piano. She wanted to be a lawyer, but that was not acceptable. And he also disapproved of her sexual orientation. She did have a mother, Beulah, which I could find very little information about. I believe that Beulah was probably dominated pretty much by George and seemed to have very little, if any at all, influence on her daughter, Georgia. Georgia attended Martha Washington College in Virginia, which was attended by 40,000 women. That was a pretty good-sized school in those days. While she was there, she did study music, but I found no mention of the piano. She taught for 8 years after graduating from Martha Washington College. And then, after those 8 years, she moved into social work. She was hired as a field agent for Mississippi Children's Home Finding Society. Her job was foster home placement. She found her true purpose here, realizing that she could literally take children from poor homes for placement elsewhere. She did learn, though, that she could overstep her bounds, which she did, and in 1922, she was run out of town after taking 2 little boys from their single mom, her only crime being she was young and poor. Georgia then worked for a very short time in Texas, but moved on, and in 1924 found herself at the Tennessee Children's Home Society in Memphis, Tennessee, on Poplar Avenue. I would like to read out of The Baby Thief a description of what the orphanage actually, the physical appearance of it, because we spend quite a bit of time in Before We Were Yours within those walls with the Foss children. I would like to just read to you a description of the actual building. 3 stories high, with tile roof, columns, and spacious grounds sloping upward from the street. Inside, polished wood floors led to a filing room, a personnel office, a private conference room for adoptive applicants, and George's office. The floor also shone in the formal reception room, which had 2 fireplaces and drapes of pale rose and blue. A small table bore a lamp with glass beads whose facets sparkled in the sun slanting through a window flanking a fireplace. Dahlias grew in urns on the wide front porch. The rooms upstairs were more plainly appointed, but they were clean and orderly, sterile in appearance, if not in fact. Georgia considered appearances important. So her 3 nurseries were painted pink and equipped with white metal cribs decorated with pictures of teddy bears and sleeping babies. Her aides wore starched white uniforms and crisp nurses' caps. But as one of her former employees told me, the women weren't nurses. The head caretaker tended infants while drunk. And the outfits worn by babies, when viewed by prospective adoptive parents, were strategically selected. Georgia reserved the most beautiful clothing for the bad apples, the plainest children who were hardest to sell. In the backyard of the home were swings, a sandbox, and a tall white picket fence. And 2 of Georgia's workers lived in an apartment over the garage. A cook and a gardener lived in the basement of the main building. All employees except the gardener and a chauffeur were female. A former resident described the home as a kingdom run by women. Neighbors whose sleep was disturbed by the cries of babies being smuggled into waiting limousines called the orphanage a house of mystery. Incidentally, this house does still exist today. If you're ever in Memphis and on Poplar Avenue, it is now the offices of the Baptist Brotherhood. Both George and his daughter, Georgia, seemed to be immune to the charms of children. Nevertheless, when Georgia was in her 20s, while her short time in Texas, she did adopt a girl named June. But we know from the interviews with the grandchildren who now live on the West Coast that Georgia was never close at all with her daughter June or with these grandchildren that are living on the West Coast. We can only speculate as to her possible reasons for wanting to adopt a daughter. And some feel that one might be to spite her father. Georgia completely believed that poor people were incapable of proper parenting. Children from poor families needed rescue. They needed her rescue. Just a coincidence that the parents that they went to were wealthy parents, such as Joan Crawford, Lana Turner, Pearl Buck, June Allison, only a few that were all able to pay her well for her services. She arranged over 5,000 adoptions between 1924 and 1950. Not a single one was legal. She falsified birth certificates. She falsified them by not only changing the name, but also by changing the birth date. This was to help cover up her kidnappings. And also by changing the age of the child, why the child would appear to be much brighter for their age than they really were. It all made it very difficult for any families that might have been able to try to trace children to ever be able to, with the whole certificate being false. She began the practice of sealing documents against any future search. Now in Tennessee, finally in 1999, this practice was reversed by the courts. But in all, for a time, 50 states were sealing documents, believing that secrecy was best for all. And it all began in Tennessee with Georgia Tann. And we know she had ulterior motives for sealing. There are no numbers on how many children did not survive under her care. They simply disappeared. She had the city officials in her pocket, as well as her whole staff. Because the children were never enrolled in schools, there was really no outside source to ever check on them or discover what happened to them. Georgia made a great deal of use out of advertising. She would run ads for her children, and she very often would say in her ad that children are a blank slate, ready to be formed by the new parents. Only one requirement for ownership, and that was money. No investigation was ever done of the adoptive parents, except financial. She didn't care about the birth parents or the adoptees, as long as they had money. And for 13 years, she allowed non-residents to adopt, which was breaking another Tennessee law by adopting out of state. The law also stated that a judge must verify birth parents' surrender of their children before adoption. That law was soon changed so that a notary public could be the witness of the surrender of the child or children. And guess what? Georgia and all her workers just happened to be notaries. In 1929, Depression time, Georgia found she had more children on her hand than she was able to sell. And this started something that she kept on well into the 1940s, from 1929. And they were her Christmas ads. They ran every year. They were so successful. I'd like to give you an idea of what these ads sounded like. Want a real live Christmas present? A present guaranteed to add twofold to the joy of the holidays. Well, here's your chance. For 25 children ranging in age from 3 months to 7 years will be presented to as many lucky families Christmas Eve. The press is making special arrangements with Miss Georgia Tan, Executive Director of the Memphis branch of the Tennessee Children's Home Society, to place these babies. Say whether you want a boy or a girl, brunette, blonde, or redhead. Blondes, by the way, are in the majority. Could you use a Christmas baby? Which of these 3 infant boys will you have for Christmas? Living dolls for you. Are you in the market for a 14-month-old boy? Put your orders in early. Dan, Jimmy, Ray, want one of them? Very often, the day after Georgia would run an ad, be it Christmas or any ad, the child would already be in the home of the new parents. By 1935, Georgia had placed children in 48 states, Mexico, Panama, Canada, and England. And I know you're wondering by now, what was she charging for these services? What did she charge per head? Well, it varied, which I'm sure you won't find surprising. It depended on what your means were, and particularly if you were from the East or the West Coast, the price would immediately jump up. Sometimes parents would like a visit with the child before they took them home. And of course, she would charge for the visits as well. A visit could be anywhere from $169 to $360 for a short visit. The total cost at that time for adoption from Georgia would range the lowest from $766, which in our rate of exchange would be $11,000, up to $10,000 per child, or on our price range, that would be $140,000 per child. I think we have now set the stage for what was going on in Memphis during this time for orphans, no matter how they became orphans. And that is where we find ourselves starting in 1939, when we began with Before We Were Yours. We quickly are introduced to the Foss family, Queenie and Bryony and their 5 children, ranging in age from 2 to 12. 4 girls, and the youngest is a boy. We have Rio, Camellia, Lark, Fern, Gabby, and Queenie is pregnant with twins at the time that the story starts. We are told that all the children, but one, have Queenie's lovely golden curls. The Fosses are living on a shanty boat at this time. Now, shanty boats, when I first read that, I thought, oh, a houseboat, which it was a houseboat. In post-Depression times, shanty boats grew up quickly, became very prevalent on both the Ohio and Mississippi River. At one point, it's estimated that there were 50,000 people living in these shanty boats. People that had lost their homes, but were able to perhaps build, as Bryony did, his shanty boat with a shack on top for them to live in. And he also was able to put a motor on the back end, an old Model T Ford engine, so that they could actually move in theirs and travel. And generally, the shanty boat people would head north in the summertime and return to the south in the summertime. I would like to give you an idea in Lisa's words, but actually in Real's voice on what it was like to be on the river. So I want you to put yourself on a river right now, and you're on a boat, and you can feel the waves, the motion. The sun is warm, the song sparrows sing, and the fat bass jump out of the water. A flock of white pelicans flies over in a big old arrow shape, pointing north, which means the whole summer is still ahead of us. There's not a paddle wheeler or a flatboat or a tug or a barge in sight anywhere. The river is ours, only ours. I love that passage because you get the feel of what life was like for them. Yes, they were poor, but the reader immediately realizes that this family has love, caring, and they're happy. A little more on the riverboat. Theirs was called the Arcadia. And there was a community of sorts on the river. You would get to know other travelers on the river, and maybe some would be docked next to you for quite a while. So they did have a community to fall back on if anyone needed help, and they did make use of that. For those that didn't have an engine, the boats were able to be steered with paddles, poles, and rudders. And it's on a day such as this that we just read about that Queenie goes into labor with the twins. A midwife arrives, and after dark, the midwife decides that she is no longer able to handle the delivery of these twins, and that Bryony must take Queenie to a hospital for delivery. We know this means leaving these 5 children alone. But here again, the reader knows that they can do it, that these are independent children, particularly the 12-year-old Real. She is very dependable and a very grown-up 12-year-old, helping with all the younger ones. And we're not worried about them. Yes, we're concerned about Queenie as they are concerned about their mother. Because this is the first time she's been sent to the hospital to deliver. the babies. But we are not concerned for their safety. By morning, however, George's men, who just happen to be police officers, have come to the Arcadia and have told the children they're to come with them. They're taking them to their parents. Well, before they even get into the car, Georgia arrives, and we have our first introduction to Georgia Tann in Before We Were Yours. There's a car nearby, a big car. A man in a uniform gets out and walks around to the back door and opens it so a woman can heave her way out of the seat. She stands looking at us, squinting against the sun. She's not a young woman or an old woman, but somewhere in between. She's thick and heavy in her flowered dress, and her hair is short. Some of it's gray and some of it's brown. Her face makes me think of a heron bird. That's the way she watches while the policeman lines us up. Her gray eyes move quick and jerky, tracking everything that's going on. Well, the children are put in the car, and they do go, and they are taken to the orphanage on Poplar Avenue. By the time they arrive, the children, as well as the reader, realizes they are not going to their parents at all. The first day there at the orphanage is almost an unimaginable experience as the reader reads, and these children have been told nothing. They do not consider themselves orphans. They are waiting on their father to come and get them. They know he will come as soon as they're back home, and he knows they're gone. And they're given no explanation really of any kind for anything. And here again, because it's so well written, I'd like to read an experience from the first day. The woman in the white uniform takes us upstairs and stands us along a hallway wall. Other kids form lines nearby, and I hear water running in a tub somewhere. No talking, the woman says. You will wait here quietly until it's your turn for the bath. You will take off your clothes now and fold it neatly in a pile at your feet, all of it. Blood prickles in my skin, hot and sticky, and I look around and see that all the other kids, big and small, are already doing what we've just been told to do. A sickness runs over me from head to toe. It swallows me like a backwash of stagnant water, hot from the summer sun, poisoned by everything that's fallen into it. I feel dirty from the inside out. It's not got a thing to do with the cloudy bath water that was brown with the sand and soap of all the kids who used it before me, including my sister and Gabby. Instead, I see the worker standing over me while I step into the tub, turning my shoulder to hide myself. Wash. She points at the soap and the rag. We ain't got time for dallying, you river rats. After the bath, of course, we know they have no clothing with them except the nightwear that they had been wearing. They are given a laundry basket that appears to be full of rags, and they are told to pick out clothes from that. They also quickly learn that food consists pretty much of breakfast and supper, 1 scoop of oatmeal mush per child. When nightfall comes, rather than being taken up to those bedrooms on the second floor that we heard described in The Baby Thief, they are taken to the basement and put in a room there. But there is also talk of a closet, a very dark closet, a very cold closet, one that is to be avoided at all costs. But at least for tonight, at least for the time being, they are together in the same room that night. Georgia not only advertised to sell her merchandise, but if she thought she had a good crop of orphans, which she clearly did with the Fosses, why, she would arrange a party at a local hotel room, and she would have prospective adoptees come to view the children. My last reading from Rill, I want you to hear her describe the preparation for this party. She does it so well. I want you to hear it in her words, or Lisa's words, rather than mine. The worker yells at me again, and I hurry into line. The next hour and a half is full of soap and scrubbing and hair brushing and bows and toothbrushes under our fingernails, and ribbons and lacy new clothes. We try on shoes from a closet full until we find ones that fit. We're not allowed to talk in the car. On the way over, the worker does the talking. Girls, you will sit politely with your legs together like young ladies. Do not speak unless you are spoken to. You will be mannerly toward the attendees at Miss Tan's party. You will say only good things about your time at the house. There will be toys and colors, cakes and cookies at the party today. So until the children go to the party, they have absolutely no idea what this party is about, or who the guests are, or what's going on. It doesn't take long, of course, for particularly the older ones to catch on as adults come in, couples come in, and immediately start to play and talk with certain children. We also learn that Georgia is not concerned with breaking up families. It doesn't matter, she'll split up any family to satisfy the adoptees. Now, the book is actually written in a rotation between the experience of the Floss children in 1939 and present day. We are introduced to the Stafford family, which is a well-to-do family in South Carolina. The reader immediately knows there's got to be some connection between these two groups, even though it's a totally different time period. And we begin to piece together what this might be, what this might mean, these two families. Might there be light at the end of the tunnel for some of these children? Lisa continues to rotate the chapters back and forth. We read one chapter, and then we'll go and we'll be in the other location. We'll read there. And I assure you that by the end, for those of you that haven't read, by the end of the book, you have pieced it all together, and the mystery is solved by the end of the book. I think that Lisa has probably chosen to rotate the chapters rather than just simply tell her story in a chronological order. In order to, number one, it builds suspense in a way, but early on we have that gleam of hope that it isn't all despair. Possibly somebody is surviving. Possibly there is something good. And she gives us that hope. And it also just gives us a break from this despair with the children and the fear for them and their desperation. We get a break. We get a chapter in the present, and that gives us a break before we go back, which of course we're anxious to go back to see what happened. So I think it was very well written for those reasons, and it's very hard to put the book down. I also think that Lisa Wingate has stayed very true to Georgia Tann, the true character in the book, the live character, both in physical appearance, which is exactly right on, to her actions and what she was able to do and did do the best thing that Lisa was able to do, I feel, with this story, she was able to disprove George's beliefs. We know by the end of the book that an orphan is not a blank slate with carrying no memories or any feelings or anything with them. We know that is wrong. She proves that in her story. She also proves, which we already knew, of course, that poor does not mean bad parents. I need to tell you, because we've talked about this reign, and I don't want to leave you in suspense as to how her reign of terror ended. As I said, it lasted from 1924 to 1950, 26 years of horror. Georgia died of cancer in September of 1950, which brought it to an end. To some degree, it took a little time for things to change, but it definitely came to a close upon her death. I would finally like to close by reading Lisa Wingate's dedication in the front of Before We Were Yours. It says it all. For the hundreds who vanished, and for the thousands who didn't, may your stories not be forgotten. For those who helped today's orphans find forever homes, may you always know the value of your work and your love. And on that thought, I can't think of a better way to finish except to say Merry Christmas to everybody, and I miss you all, and I hope you have wonderful holidays, and hopefully sometime in 2021, we will see each other. Thank you.